Over the past couple of months, Turkish authorities have staged an ever-escalating crackdown against the Turkish opposition, and especially the main opposition party, the CHP. While it was always going to be controversial, recent polling suggests this crackdown is appallingly unpopular with the Turkish public, denting both Turkish President Recep Erdogan's poll numbers and potentially scuppering his plan to amend the constitution. So in this video, we're going to take another look at the ongoing crackdown, and why, even if the next election isn't due until 2028, this all still presents an acute problem for Erdogan. Who's the worst politician right now? Hear our thoughts and argue with us on our podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. So let's start with a quick recap. At the beginning of this year, Turkish President Recep Erdogan carried out a sweeping crackdown against not just opposition politicians, but also opposition-affiliated officials and journalists. Between January and March, at least 300 people who had some sort of link to an opposition party were detained by Turkish authorities, including, perhaps most notably, Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul and presumptive presidential candidate for Turkey's largest opposition party, the CHP. The CHP's previous presidential candidate, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, lost the last presidential election to Erdogan in 2023. But İmamoğlu is more popular than Kılıçdaroğlu, and polls have reliably found that İmamoğlu would beat Erdogan in a head-to-head. Anyway, İmamoğlu's arrest came just a few days after Istanbul University suddenly annulled his degree, which would effectively bar him from running for the presidency. And some of the charges against him were pretty ridiculous. They included, for instance, the accusation that İmamoğlu's electoral alliance with the pro-Kurd DEM party at last year's municipal elections amounted to support for the PKK, a Kurdish separatist group. Not only is this quite a stretch, but Turkish prosecutors were also making this argument at the same time as Erdogan was negotiating a truce with the PKK, presumably in the hopes of convincing DEM to help him change the constitution to allow him to run for another term. For context, Erdogan has already been president for 2 terms, the maximum allowed under the current constitution. He could change the constitution to allow a 3rd term, but this would require a 2/3 majority in the legislature, and Erdogan's AK party would probably need support from DEM to reach this 2/3 threshold. Anyway, you get the idea. The charges against İmamoğlu looked pretty spurious, and widely perceived as politically motivated. In other words, a sneaky way for Erdogan to impair the CHP and push their most popular politician out of frontline politics. Anyway, if you just glance at the international headlines, it looks like Erdogan has essentially gotten away with it. Erdogan has survived the recent wave of protests, and the crackdown has actually escalated in the months since, with at least 17 opposition mayors detained so far. Earlier this month, the authorities even launched an investigation into CHP chair Özgür Özel, who's been organising the protests, accusing him of, quote, insulting the president, and İmamoğlu was sentenced to 20 months in jail a couple of weeks ago. The international reaction has also been remarkably muted. Trump is unsurprisingly unfussed about Erdogan's autocratic tendencies, and the EU, who would usually put up a bit of a fuss, want to stay in Erdogan's good books at the moment, because they know that Turkey could play a big role in both negotiating peace in Ukraine and rearming Europe, given Turkey has a booming defence industry and one of the biggest armies in NATO. However, even if Erdogan has been able to keep his grip on power and avoid international criticism, the crackdown apparently hasn't gone down well with the Turkish public. A survey by Gundamar Research, for instance, found that 54% of Turkish citizens see the crackdown as unjust and politically driven, while only 18% view it as legitimate. Similarly, another survey by Panorama TR found that 57% of Turkish citizens think the real motivation behind the crackdown is to apply political pressure on the opposition, while only 35% think it's genuinely about corruption. This makes this latest crackdown unlike Erdogan's previous crackdowns, like, say, the one in 2016, which was actually supported by much of the Turkish public. This is why the net effect has been to make İmamoğlu more popular and Erdogan less popular. Metropole polling conducted in April, for instance, gave İmamoğlu a 7-point lead over Erdogan, up from just a couple of points earlier this year. Furthermore, Erdogan has become so unpopular that he now polls way behind other less well-known CHP politicians, who could run instead of İmamoğlu if he's in jail. A Themis poll carried out between May and June, for instance, found that Erdogan would lose by about 20 points to Özal, and by an astonishing 30 points to Mansur Yavaş, the CHP mayor of Ankara, who's widely perceived as being on the right of the CHP. While this poll is definitely an outlier, every poll we could find gives Yavaş a solid lead over Erdogan. The latest Özdemir poll, for instance, gives him a 6-point lead in a head-to-head runoff, while another Toplam poll gives him a 9-point lead in the first round. Similarly, the CHP themselves have established a steady lead over the AKP. According to Europelect's poll aggregator, the CHP currently have about a 6-point lead, having been neck and neck as recently as January. Now, at this point, you might be asking, why does any of this matter? After all, the next election isn't due until 2028. And well, that's true, but this still creates at least 2 more immediate problems for Erdogan. First, the crackdown has spooked international investors. İmamoğlu's arrest triggered a sharp sell-off in Turkish assets, forcing Turkey's central bank to raise interest rates and spend over $50 billion in reserves to defend the Turkish lira. While things have calmed down as the crackdown has continued, investors have continued to pull their money out, as evidenced by the lira's steady decline. The lira is currently trading at an all-time low of about 41 to the dollar, compared to about 36 before İmamoğlu's arrest and about 20 before the 2023 election. This has made it even harder for Erdogan and his government to bring down inflation, which is still running at about 35% and remains by far and away voters' top priority. Second, Erdogan's falling poll ratings and widespread public upset at the crackdown might make DEM wary of supporting Erdogan's plan to amend the constitution. In May, having negotiated a peace deal with the main Kurdish separatist group in Turkey, the PKK, Erdogan announced the creation of a commission to draft what he described as a new civilian constitution. And he's clearly hoping that, if it includes new devolution measures to give Kurds more autonomy, the DEM will support this new so-called civilian constitution, even if it scraps the 2-term presidential limit. This quid pro quo was always going to be difficult to pull off, not least because lots of Erdogan's current supporters won't like the idea of devolving power to the Kurds, but the widespread opposition to this crackdown will make things even more difficult, because DEM won't want to be seen to be conspiring with Erdogan. If you want to know more about this topic, then there's plenty of other outlets reporting on it too. Unfortunately though, every news source has a bias, and no matter how hard each of us try, we'll inevitably miss a story or two, or worse, only hear half the story in the first place. That's where our sponsor this week, Ground News, comes in. Ground News is a website and app that collects thousands of articles to help you better understand the world around you, pulling back the curtain on media bias. For example, this story about the ongoing crackdown has been covered by more than 171 sources. We know that more than 34 of these have been reported by the left, and 21 of these have been reported by the right. Every story also comes with a detailed view of the bias distribution, factuality scores, and even specific ownership information. But my favourite part of the app and website is the aptly named blind spot feed. It presents you with stories and articles that haven't been reported on by one side of the aisle or the other. For instance, if you lean right, you might have missed this story about Erdogan claiming Istanbul was getting ready for fresh peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. When it comes to blind spots, it's not just about discovering different stories. It's also about discovering just how political bias frames the stories themselves. Having a tool that helps you spot this and helps you take action really is a game changer. It's no secret that here at TLDR News, we're constantly thankful for Ground News. It's such an incredibly useful platform that captures information you can't get anywhere else, and keeps you informed in a media landscape that's constantly trying to attract your attention and sway you towards or away from certain political viewpoints. If you're interested in everything that Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan using the link in the description, or by scanning the QR code. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.